finish, not with my words, but with my friend Jack Metzger's words. Jack is way wiser than I am in almost everything. He's a few years older, so he's earned it. But he wrote this wonderful essay in this book that John Russo and I edited on sort of an overview of working class studies. He wrote a piece on the way we talk about class in American culture, and he ends it this way. I'm finished by reading a couple of paragraphs from him. I know that class and class identity are complicated in these United States. My father was a militant steelworker shop steward who, with an iron will and an aching heart, virtually herded my sister and me into the professional middle class, while my mother was a college graduate and a professional worker, a teacher, who steadfastly protected and nourished our working class culture. I grew up thinking I was middle class because we were so much better off than kids from non-union families, and I was surprised in college when I found out I had to become middle class. Class and identity are complicated in America, but not so complicated as to be meaningless. Americans already think in class terms, but the mainstream vernacular, that upper, middle, poor, will not let us recognize, let alone think clearly about this complexity. Working class studies will. We don't need long strings of class permutations. Neither do we need one definition for all occasions. We simply need to make it harder and harder to speak in the existing vernacular, and to insist on the inclusion of the working class wherever and whenever our insistence might make this difference. Working class studies has already shown us how this can help us understand ourselves and our society better than we do now. For most of us, it's personal. It's time now to make it political. Thank you. I am delighted to take questions. Oh, perfect. Questions? Yes?
Yeah, I'm interested in the distinction you made between individual advancement versus supporting the community. You associated individual advancement with a middle class value and community advancement as a working class value, because I was a first year college student, and I think the most important thing that I didn't know that my middle class peers did understand was the importance of college as a place for social networking. And I think if your father is a stockbroker who's getting business spearheaded by former fraternity brothers, you understand that the social contacts you make in college are probably more important than staying up late drinking with your friends is maybe more important than going to class. And the values I got from my working class parents were very much about the meritocracy, and that what you know should be much more important than who you know. And it's been very hard. I still haven't unlearned that lesson. It's difficult, And so I just wanted your comments on that.
Yeah, here's where I would make the distinction. That the reason that you're doing that social networking, if you're middle class, is to advance yourself. You're doing it so that you meet people who can help you develop your career. And the working class value would be you're making those connections because you value those connections. That it isn't about that, what is it going to do for me? So you're right that for many working class families, there is a deep investment in that idea of meritocracy. Work hard, and you can get ahead. And we say this to our kids, in part because if we're sending them off to college, Lord knows we want them to get somewhere from that, and we think they're going to get somewhere. But I think a lot of it has to do with sort of what's the end goal. So that's where I would make that distinction. But you're right, and I think it's a very important detail. And it is true, and it's one of the things I say to my students when I talk to them about what did they get at Youngstown State University versus what they might have gotten if they went to, even Miami of Ohio. And a lot of it is about the networks, the connections you make, and who do you know. And that's a very important kind of thing. But it's a more instrumentalist. Well, not really, because a lot of who do you know in working class culture is about the only way we can survive is if we stick together. So. Other questions? Yes?
I'm always conscious when you talk about class. I guess I identify as working class, but I'm now a straddler, and that's a very uncomfortable position to be in. And I always have the feeling that there's a they in there. We are going to study them.
Yes.
And I often find as well that the comments that are made, there's a part of me in my gut that is always offended of how working people are described. And I know that there's some truth in there, something that lives in there that says we're not getting it right in putting these pieces together. I think this is extremely valuable. I'm delighted that the idea is moving forward. but I would like to see more language, what I think of as inclusivity. So it's not us studying them,
Yes.
but it's we collectively learning about us as a whole. And I don't know how to get there, but I just kind of offer that as a sort of a burning issue that I
And it's a burning issue for the field as well. Part of our effort to sort of bridge that academic community boundary is to think about how do we design research that does not put us in the position as the expert scholars of studying they, the working class people, as specimens. And we're very conscious of that. And there's a lot of conversation about that. And it's part of why I think we start with stories. That most of us in this field recognize that our own class position matters, and our class position as scholars matters, and that we have to, if nothing else, just be really, really conscious of that. And there is a lot of work where I think people are trying very hard to figure out how do we study this issue in ways that where we're not just sitting in our offices reading books, or even not just going out and interviewing people, but learning from them. And it's a challenge. There is not an easy answer to that. But it's not something that we're not aware of. Did I phrase that right? It is something that I think a lot of people are really thinking very hard about. It's, you know, it is one of those things, I know for myself, as someone who comes from a more professional middle class background, I have a constant self-awareness about how can I talk about the working class legitimately. And I find myself being caught regularly, you probably heard it while I was talking tonight, between they and we. Because they reinforces that sense that, well, I'm over here and they, the working class, are over there. We feels much more comfortable, but then I know I'm not really working class. I mean, even if I had come from a working class background, where I am now in my life, I'm not working class. So I don't know the answer, but I know it's an important issue.
But I think that there's something in dialogue that begins to cross all these barriers. I just cherish the possibility that those of us who are working class will fit in and will advance this broader agenda that serves all of us communally.
And let me say just one more thing about that, which is that there has been a tradition in working class studies of trying to nurture working class academics and working class people who may not be academics, but trying to figure out how to make it possible for them to be as full of participants in things like the conferences as possible, so that we can have that kind of dialogue. But working class academics are not living in the neighborhood anymore, and so we're always there.